The keys were still warm when Marcus pressed them into my palm. That's the detail I keep returning to, not the look in his eyes. Not the way his wife sat motionless in their idling SUV with the engine running. And both kids buckled tight in the back seat. But the warmth of those keys, like he'd been clutching them in his fist for a long time, before he finally decided to walk across the street and hand them over. It was a Tuesday morning in late September. The leaves on the oak between our driveways had just started to turn. I was standing in my garage, sorting through a bin of extension cords I'd been meaning to organize for 3 months. And Marcus appeared at the edge of my driveway, like a man delivering news he didn't want to say out loud. "I need you to hold on to these," he said. No greeting, no preamble, just that sentence, flat and deliberate, like he'd rehearsed it on the walk over. I looked down at the keyring. 2 house keys, a mailbox key, a small brass one I didn't recognize. "You going somewhere?" "Yeah." He glanced back at his house. "Taking the family out of town for a bit." "Everything okay?" He didn't answer that. Instead, he looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something in his face I'd never seen in the 4 years we'd been neighbors. Marcus was a big guy, former military, the kind of man who pressure-washed his own driveway on Sunday mornings and never let his trash cans sit at the curb past noon. He didn't rattle. But standing there in my garage, with the morning light cutting across his jaw, he looked like a man who'd been awake for days and had finally accepted something terrible. "If anything happens," he said, "there's supplies in the basement. Canned goods, water, batteries. The gun safe code is 8421. I wrote it on a card inside the kitchen drawer next to the fridge." "Marcus, what are you talking about?" "Just hold the keys, Daniel. Please." My wife, Sarah, appeared at the door that connected the garage to our kitchen. She had our daughter Lily on her hip, still in pajamas. "Hey, Marcus, you guys headed on a trip?" He forced a smile. It didn't reach his eyes. "Something like that. You folks take care of yourselves." He turned and walked back across the street. Didn't look back. 30 seconds later, the SUV pulled out of the driveway, turned left at the end of our cul-de-sac, and disappeared past the row of Bradford pears that lined Oakmont Drive. Sarah watched them go. "That was weird." "Yeah." "Did he seem off to you?" "He gave me his house keys, told me there's supplies in his basement, and gave me the code to his gun safe." She shifted Lily to her other hip and stared at me. "What?" I held up the keys. The brass one caught the light. "I don't know." We didn't talk about it much for the rest of that day. I went to work. I managed a regional logistics office for a shipping company, 15-minute commute. Nothing exciting. And Sarah stayed home with Lily, who was 2.5 and had just entered the phase where she repeated everything you said with terrifying accuracy. Normal day, normal routine. I ate a sandwich at my desk, approved 3 shipment reroutes, and drove home listening to sports radio. But that night, I checked the news. Not because of Marcus specifically, more because of a feeling. A low hum of unease that had been building in the background of my attention for days. There'd been scattered reports out of Atlanta. Something about a contamination event at a CDC-adjacent research facility. The details were vague. The official statements were the kind of carefully worded nothings that told you more by what they didn't say. Isolated incident, containment protocols active, no threat to the general public. I sat on the couch after Sarah and Lily went to bed, scrolling through feeds in the dark. Someone had posted cell phone footage from a hospital in Decatur. The video was shaky, poorly lit. But in the last 4 seconds, something moved in the background of the emergency room that didn't move the way a person should. I watched those 4 seconds 11 times. Then I locked the front door, checked the windows, and went to bed with Marcus's keys on my nightstand. By Wednesday afternoon, the reports out of Atlanta had multiplied. Not on the major networks. They were still running their usual cycle of political scandals and weather forecasts. But on local affiliate stations and independent feeds, the language was shifting. The word quarantine appeared for the first time in a Georgia DOT press release about highway closures south of the city. 3 hospitals in the metro area had stopped accepting new patients. A nursing home in Marietta reported that 14 residents had become unresponsive and subsequently aggressive within a 6-hour window. I read that phrase 3 times, unresponsive and subsequently aggressive. At work, nobody was talking about it. My colleague, Rena, was complaining about her son's soccer schedule. My operations lead, Tom, was arguing with a vendor on the phone about pallet dimensions. The world was functioning exactly as it always did, and I sat at my desk with Marcus's keys in my pocket, feeling like a man who'd seen a crack in the foundation that nobody else had noticed. I called Marcus at lunch, straight to voicemail. I texted him, "Hey man, just checking in. Everything good?" No response. I checked his wife Angela's social media. Her last post was from Sunday, a photo of their youngest, Deshaun, eating a popsicle on their back deck. Nothing since. When I got home, Sarah was in the kitchen making pasta. Lily was in her high chair, smashing goldfish crackers with her fist. The TV was on in the living room, muted, tuned to a cable news channel. The ticker at the bottom read, "CDC expands advisory zone to include portions of North Georgia and southern Tennessee." "Did you see this?" I said. Sarah glanced at the screen. "I saw something about it earlier. Some kind of illness?" "They're closing highways." "The flu closes highways sometimes. Remember that ice storm 2 years ago?" "This isn't ice." She set down the wooden spoon and looked at me. Sarah was a pragmatist. She was the kind of person who didn't catastrophize, who approached problems with a calm, sequential logic that I usually admired and occasionally found maddening. "Daniel, what are you saying?" "I'm saying something is wrong." Marcus knew. That's why he left. Marcus is paranoid. He once told me he keeps a go bag in his truck at all times. Maybe he was right to. She didn't respond. Lily said, "Right to," from her high chair, and under different circumstances, we would have laughed. That night, I went across the street. I used Marcus's keys to open his front door and stepped into a house that was immaculate and silent. The air smelled faintly of pine cleaner. Everything was in order, dishes put away, beds made, toys organized in the kids' rooms. But in the kitchen, taped to the counter next to the stove, was a handwritten note on yellow legal paper. It read, "Daniel, if you're reading this, it's worse than they're saying. Don't wait for official word. Trust the timeline, not the narrative. You have maybe 72 hours from when mainstream picks it up. The basement has enough for 2 families for 3 weeks. Board the windows from inside. Don't waste ammunition on ones you can outrun. The head is the only reliable stop. God be with you and yours. M." I stood in Marcus's kitchen and read that note 4 times. My hands were steady. My mind was not. I took the note, locked his front door behind me, and walked back across the street. Sarah was on the couch, scrolling her phone. I sat down next to her and handed her the note. She read it in silence. Then she set it on the coffee table. pressed her palms against her knees, and stared straight ahead for a long time. "You think he's serious," she said. It wasn't a question. "I watched a video last night from a hospital in Georgia. Something was wrong with the people in it, Sarah. The way they moved." "What do you mean, the way they moved?" "Wrong. They moved wrong." She picked up the note again. Read it once more. Put it back down. "What do you want to do?" "I want to go through his basement tonight. I want to know exactly what we have. And tomorrow morning, I want to go to the hardware store before everyone else figures this out." She looked at me. In her eyes, I saw the negotiation happening, the part of her that wanted to dismiss this, to protect normalcy, warring with the part of her that had married a man she trusted and who was now sitting beside her with fear carved into his face. "Okay," she said quietly. "Let's go look at the basement." Marcus's basement was a revelation. The man had been preparing for something like this, maybe not this specifically, but something for years. Against the far wall stood a set of industrial shelving units, each one loaded with canned goods organized by type: beans, vegetables, soups, meats, fruits. Beside them, cases of bottled water stacked 4 high. A first aid kit the size of a carry-on suitcase, a hand-crank radio, flashlights, batteries sorted by size and labeled bins, 2 5-gallon jugs of bleach, duct tape, plastic sheeting, a water filtration system still in its box. The gun safe sat in the corner. I punched in 8421. Inside, a 12-gauge shotgun, a 9mm handgun, a .22 rifle, and enough ammunition for each to make my stomach tighten. Cleaning kits, a ballistic vest that looked like it had seen use, 2 hunting knives in leather sheaths. Sarah stood at the bottom of the stairs, arms crossed, taking inventory with her eyes. She didn't speak for a full minute. "He wasn't paranoid," she finally said. "No, he was ready." We spent the next 2 hours hauling supplies from Marcus's basement, 2 hours. I made the trip across the street 14 times, arms loaded, moving quickly under the streetlights. Our neighborhood, Oakmont Estates, was a quiet suburban development. 32 homes arranged around a central cul-de-sac with a small park and a retention pond. At 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night, every house was dark except the Hendersons 2 doors down. Where the blue glow of a television flickered behind drawn curtains, nobody saw us, nobody was watching. By midnight, our basement looked like a supply depot. Sarah had organized everything with her typical precision food on one side, water and medical on the other, weapons and tools along the back wall. Lily slept upstairs, oblivious. The baby monitor sat on a shelf between cans of black beans and boxes of crackers, its green light steady and calm. "We need plywood," I said. "For the windows. First thing in the morning. And we should talk to the Hendersons. Frank's a contractor. He'll have tools we don't." Sarah hesitated. "Do we tell them why?" "I don't know yet. If we tell people and nothing happens, we're the neighborhood conspiracy theorists. If we don't tell people and something does happen, we're the neighbors who watch them die." That landed hard. She sat down on an overturned bucket and rubbed her temples. "Let me think about it." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the recliner in our living room with my laptop open, refreshing feeds every few minutes. At 2 a.m, a video surfaced from a truck stop outside Chattanooga, Tennessee. The person filming was inside their cab, doors locked. In the parking lot, beneath the amber floodlights, 3 figures moved between the rigs. They walked with a staggered, lurching gait, not drunk, not injured, but broken. like their nervous systems were misfiring. One of them slammed its head against the side of a trailer, pulled back, and did it again. The person filming whispered, "Oh God, oh God, oh God." And then the video cut. By 3 in the morning, the major networks had started to acknowledge something was happening. CNN ran a chyron. Unusual illness spreading in Southeast. Governor declares state of emergency. Fox had a panel debating whether it was bioterrorism. MSNBC showed aerial footage of I-75 southbound completely stopped, headlights stretching to the horizon. At 4 in the morning, I heard a sound outside. A dog barking, not the excited bark of a dog that's seen a squirrel, but the sustained, panicked barking of an animal that has encountered something it cannot process. It was coming from the miller's yard, 3 houses east. Their golden retriever, Biscuit, was in the backyard, and it barked without stopping for 22 minutes before it suddenly went silent. I stood at the window, looking out at the dark street. Nothing moved. The oak tree between our driveways swayed gently in a breeze I couldn't feel. Marcus's house sat empty and dark. A house that had been a home 12 hours ago and was now a monument to foresight. The silence after the dog stopped barking was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. At 6 in the morning, Sarah came downstairs. She looked at me, still dressed, still in the chair, laptop open. "It's real," I said. "How bad?" "3 states, maybe more. The highways are closed." She stood there in her bathrobe, hair uncombed, and I watched the last remnant of skepticism leave her face like color draining from a photograph. "I'll get Lily dressed," she said. "You go to the hardware store, now." The hardware store opened at 7. I was there at 6:40, and I wasn't the first. A white pickup was already parked near the entrance. And a man I didn't recognize sat in the cab, with his phone pressed to his ear, talking fast. By the time the manager unlocked the doors, a heavy-set woman named Donna, who'd worked there since I moved to town, there were 9 of us waiting. Nobody spoke. We filed in like people entering a church during a funeral, each knowing why we were there but unwilling to name it. I bought every sheet of plywood they had in 3/4-inch 11 sheets. I bought a box of 3-inch deck screws, a battery-powered drill, 2 additional drill batteries, a pry bar, a roll of heavy-gauge plastic sheeting, and 4 boxes of N95 masks that were stacked near the register in a display that hadn't been there a week ago. Donna rang me up without commentary, but when she handed me the receipt, she said, "You might want to fill your bathtubs too." I looked at her. "Water pressure goes when the pumping stations lose staff," she said. "Happened during the ice storm in 14, but that was 3 days." She paused. "This won't be 3 days." I loaded the truck and drove home, doing 15 over the speed limit. The roads were quiet, but not empty. I passed 2 cars heading in the opposite direction with luggage strapped to their roofs. At the intersection of Route 9 and Maple, a sheriff's deputy sat in his cruiser with the lights off, just watching traffic. Our eyes met as I passed. He didn't wave. Back at the house, I found Sarah in the kitchen with Lily in her high chair, eating oatmeal. The television was on, volume low. The president was giving a statement from the Rose Garden. I caught fragments. Abundance of caution. Coordinated federal response. No reason for panic. Behind him, I could see staffers moving with a speed that contradicted every reassuring word leaving his mouth. "Frank Henderson is outside," Sarah said. "He saw you loading the truck." I went out the front door. Frank was standing at the end of my driveway in work boots and a flannel, arms folded, watching me with the sharp assessment of a man who builds things for a living. and knows when something is structurally unsound. Plywood, he said, nodding at my truck bed. Yeah. 11 sheets. Yeah. You boarding your windows? It wasn't a question. I decided, in that moment, that the time for social delicacy had passed. Frank, have you been watching the news? My wife has. I've been watching the videos people are posting. The real ones. Then you know. He uncrossed his arms and put his hands in his pockets. Frank Henderson was 61, retired Army Corps of Engineers, built like a man who'd spent his life lifting things most people hired someone else to lift. His wife Carol was a retired school nurse. They had no children at home. Their son lived in Portland, their daughter in Dallas. I know something, he said. I don't know what. My neighbor Marcus left yesterday morning, gave me his house keys, and told me there were supplies in his basement. He left a note saying we had maybe 72 hours from when the mainstream news picked it up. When did mainstream pick it up? Last night, 3, 4 in the morning. Frank looked at his watch, a reflex, but a telling one. So we're on the clock. I think so. He studied my face. What do you need? Help boarding windows, yours and mine. And I think we need to talk to the rest of the street. Not everyone's going to listen. I know, but I'd rather give them the chance. He nodded once, the decisive nod of a man accustomed to making calls on job sites. Let me get my tools. Give me 20 minutes. Those 20 minutes changed everything. Because while Frank went home and came back with a contractor's worth of equipment, circular saw, impact driver, sawhorses, a level, and a canvas bag of hand tools, I knocked on 3 other doors on Oakmont Drive. The Patels at number 7 didn't answer. Their car was gone. The Yamamotos at number 12 listened politely, thanked me, and closed their door with the expression of people who believed I was overreacting. But at number 15, I found Jess Calloway sitting on her front steps with a shotgun across her knees and a cigarette between her lips, watching the street like she'd been expecting someone to come. Took you long enough, she said. Jess Calloway was 36, divorced, and worked as an ER nurse at St. Catherine's Medical Center, 20 miles east. She'd come off a double shift at 4 that morning. What she'd seen in the emergency room had driven her straight home, where she'd loaded every weapon she owned, pushed her couch against her front door, and sat down to wait for daylight. 3 came in around midnight, she said, standing in my garage now, coffee in hand while Frank cut plywood on the sawhorses in the driveway. Ambulance brought them from a car accident on the bypass. Except it wasn't an accident. The driver had attacked the passengers while the car was moving. When the paramedics pulled them out, the driver was still trying to bite. Not punch, not grab, bite. Sarah was inside with Lily. I'd asked her to keep the doors closed while we worked. They restrained him, Jess continued, strapped him to a gurney, but his vitals were wrong. Heart rate through the roof, temperature at 105, pupils fixed and dilated. The attending thought it was PCP, or bath salts. Ordered a tox screen. But then the second one turned. One of the passengers. She'd been unconscious, and then she wasn't. She just sat up and grabbed the nurse nearest to her and sank her teeth into his forearm before anyone could react. She paused, took a drink of coffee. Her hand was steady, but I could see the cost of that steadiness in the tightness around her mouth. After that, it was chaos. Security came. Someone called the police. But by the time the shift supervisor locked down the wing, we had 5 people bitten and 2 more presenting symptoms without any bite at all. I don't know if it's airborne or fluid transmitted or both. What I know is that the ones who turn stop being people. Whatever's in their eyes when they come back isn't recognition. It's not even rage. It's just hunger. Frank stopped cutting. The sudden silence of the saw made the morning feel enormous. A cardinal sang from the oak tree. Somewhere down the street, a lawn sprinkler hissed on its timer, watering grass for a world that was ending. "How fast?" Frank asked. "What?" "How fast from bite to turn?" "The ones I saw 2 to 4 hours, maybe faster for some. The paramedic who got bitten turned in under 90 minutes. I leaned against my workbench. The keys, Marcus's keys, were still in my pocket. I could feel the teeth of them through the denim, small and insistent, like a reminder. "We need to secure the street," I said. "Not just our houses, the whole cul-de-sac. There's one way in and one way out. If we block the entrance, we've got a defensible position." Frank shook his head. "Can't block the entrance with plywood. We'd need vehicles, heavy ones." "You've got a dump trailer in your side yard." He looked at me with something close to respect. "I do." "Park it across the entrance, sideways. Block the gap on either side with whatever we've got, the Patel's minivan if they left it, the Yamamoto's boat trailer. That gives us one entry point to defend. And we need people willing to defend it." Jess set her coffee down on my workbench. "I'll take a shift, but I need to sleep first. I've been up for 30 hours. "Sleep at my place," I offered. "Sarah can set up the guest room. When you wake up, we'll have a plan." She looked at me with the clear-eyed evaluation of a woman who assessed strangers for a living. "You're taking this seriously?" "My neighbor saw this coming and left. I don't have that option. My daughter is 2. Something shifted in her expression. Not sympathy. Something harder. Resolve. "Okay, let me get my gear." By noon, Frank and I had boarded 9 windows across 2 houses. Carol Henderson brought us sandwiches and lemonade, moving with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had lived through Army life and knew that feeding people was its own form of combat readiness. She also brought news. She'd been on the phone with her daughter in Dallas. The airports were shutting down. Not officially, they were just experiencing delays and reducing capacity. But their daughter's flight to come home had been canceled 3 times. "She's scared," Carol said, and for the first time, I saw the iron in her composure bend. Frank put his hand on her shoulder. "She's smart and she's tough. She'll be okay." He didn't believe it. I could hear that. But he said it because it was what needed to be said. And sometimes the architecture of hope matters more than its foundation. At 1 o'clock, the power flickered for the first time. The flicker lasted only a second, lights dimming, the refrigerator hiccuping, then everything resuming. But it sent a current of anxiety through me that was almost physical. I was in Marcus's house at the time, retrieving the last of the supplies from his basement. And in that brief darkness, I stood perfectly still and listened. The house settled around me. The furnace ticked. And from somewhere outside, distant but unmistakable, I heard a sound that didn't belong in a suburban neighborhood at 1 in the afternoon. A car horn, blaring continuously, as though someone had collapsed against the steering wheel and couldn't lift themselves off. The horn blared for 9 minutes. Then it stopped. I carried the last case of water across the street and found Frank in my driveway, looking south toward the main road. A column of dark smoke rose from somewhere beyond the tree line. Not a house fire, something larger, industrial maybe, or a multi-vehicle pileup. "That's near the highway interchange," Frank said. "We need to move the trailer. Now." He didn't argue. We took his truck, backed the dump trailer off its blocks, and positioned it across the entrance to Oakmont Drive where our street met the through road. It wasn't perfect. There were gaps on either side, but with the Patel's abandoned Honda Odyssey pushed into the gap on the left and a stack of landscaping timbers from Frank's yard filling the right, we created a barrier that would stop a car and slow down anything on foot. By the time we finished, 3 more neighbors had emerged. Todd Marsh, from number 22, mid-40s, accountant, visibly frightened but trying to project calm, came with his teenage son. Kyle, who was 17 and carried himself with the wary alertness of a kid who'd been gaming apocalypse scenarios his entire life and now realized the training was relevant. Beside them came the Okafor family, Emeka and Blessing, both in their early 50s, immigrants from Nigeria who'd built a life in this neighborhood with the quiet determination of people who understood that safety was never guaranteed. Emeka worked in IT, Blessing was a pharmacist. "We've been watching since this morning," Emeka said. "The reports from the southeast. It's spreading faster than they're admitting." "How do you know?" Todd asked. "I work with people in server farms across the country. 3 facilities have gone dark since last night. Not offline dark. Nobody answering. When infrastructure stops being maintained, it means the people maintaining it are gone." Todd's face went pale. Kyle put a hand on his father's arm, a gesture so instinctively protective that it made my chest ache. I stood on Frank's dump trailer and addressed the 7 adults and 1 teenager gathered in the street. I'd never been a leader. I managed shipping logistics. I was good at spreadsheets and scheduling and making sure pallets arrived where they needed to be. But someone had to speak, and Marcus had handed me the keys. So maybe that meant he'd chosen me for this, or maybe it just meant I was the nearest warm body. Either way, I opened my mouth. "Here's what I know. There's an infection spreading through the southeast. People who contract it become violent and lose all higher function. Multiple highways are closed. Atlanta is under quarantine. The power has flickered once already. My neighbor, a veteran, prepared for exactly this scenario and left yesterday morning. He left me enough supplies for 2 families for 3 weeks. What I'm proposing is that we work together. We've barricaded the street entrance. We need to organize watches, pool resources, and make decisions about how to handle what's coming." Silence. The oak tree rustled. The smoke column to the south had thickened. "What exactly is coming?" Todd asked. I looked at Jess Calloway's house, where she was sleeping behind boarded windows, and thought about what she'd told me. The paramedic who turned in 90 minutes. The thing in the patient's eyes that wasn't recognition. "The infected," I said. "And based on how fast this is moving, probably within the next 24 hours. Blessing Okafor stepped forward. "I have access to medications, antibiotics, anti-inflammatories, suture kits. I brought what I could from the pharmacy before the manager sent everyone home. If anyone needs medical support, I can provide it." "I have generators," Frank added. 2 of them. Enough fuel for maybe a week if we're conservative. "I have network equipment," Emeka said. "If the cell towers go, I can set up a local mesh network so we can communicate within the neighborhood." Something was forming. Not a plan, not yet, but the skeleton of one. People offering what they had. Strangers becoming neighbors, becoming something more. I felt it crystallize in the warm September air, fragile and essential. "Okay," I said. "Let's get organized." We divided the labor by capability, not by any hierarchy anyone voted on. It happened naturally, the way water finds its level. Frank took charge of physical fortification. He and Kyle Marsh spent the afternoon reinforcing the barricade with additional materials scavenged from garages up and down the street. 2 more cars pushed into supporting positions, sheets of corrugated metal from someone's unfinished shed project, and a length of chain-link fencing that Amika helped wire into place across the remaining gaps. By 4 o'clock, the entrance to Oakmont Drive looked less like a suburban street and more like a checkpoint. It wasn't military grade, but it was visible, deliberate, and would require effort to breach. Jess woke at 3 and took over medical planning with a blessing. They set up a triage station in Frank and Carol's dining room. The Hendersons' house was the most central and had the most open floor plan. Blessing laid out her pharmacy supplies on the dining table with the careful organization of someone who understood that in a crisis, seconds spent searching for the right medication were seconds someone might not have. Antibiotics, painkillers, antiseptics, bandages, a blood pressure cuff, a stethoscope, bottles of saline, a surgical stapler still in its packaging. Jess contributed supplies from her own nursing bag and added a field guide to emergency medicine that she kept on her bookshelf for reference. Sarah coordinated food. She went house to house with Carol, inventorying what every participating household could contribute to a common supply. The Marshes had a deep freezer full of meat, untracked and useless once the power went, so Sarah decided we'd eat the perishables first. Amika and Blessing contributed rice, dried beans, and a remarkable collection of spices that Blessing insisted on including because, as she said, if we must survive, we will not survive eating bland food. It was the first time anyone laughed that day. It mattered more than I expected. I took communications. With Amika's help, I set up a group on our phones while cellular still worked and planned for the mesh network as a backup. I also positioned Marcus's hand crank radio in our living room and assigned monitoring shifts. The AM frequencies were the most informative. Local stations were still broadcasting, and their reports were less filtered than the networks. By late afternoon, we had a clearer picture, and it was worse than any of us had allowed ourselves to imagine. The infection had been confirmed in 11 states. The CDC had stopped issuing updates 2 hours ago. The National Guard had been deployed to Atlanta, Nashville, Charlotte, and Birmingham. But reports from those cities suggested the deployments were defensive. The Guard was establishing perimeters around critical infrastructure, not attempting to contain the spread in residential areas. A ham radio operator out of Knoxville, Anir Sidaraz, reported that the infected were moving in groups now, drawn towards sound and light, traveling at a pace he described as relentless but not fast. That distinction felt important. They could be outrun. They could not be outlasted. I stood at the barricade at sunset and looked down the through road that connected our neighborhood to the town center 2 miles south. The smoke column had spread into a haze that tinted the sky amber. The car horn was silent now. No traffic moved on the road. In the distance, I could hear something that might have been sirens or might have been screaming at that distance. The sounds were indistinguishable. Todd Marsh walked up beside me. He'd been quiet since the meeting, processing. His accountant's mind trying to apply logic to a situation that defied it. His son Kyle was back at the barricade, tying lengths of rope between the vehicles to create tripwire alerts. "How long do you think we have?" Todd asked. Jess said 2 to 4 hours from bite to turn. If the infection reached our area today? And there are people in town right now encountering it. Tonight. Maybe tomorrow. He adjusted his glasses, a nervous habit I'd already cataloged. I should tell you something. Before this, I mean. I was planning to leave my wife. We've been separated for 6 months. She moved to her sister's in Raleigh. Kyle chose to stay with me. I didn't know why he was telling me this. Then I did. He was telling me because he might not get another chance. And people facing the end of recognizable life feel compelled to speak truths they've been carrying. Kyle is what matters now, I said. Kyle is what's always mattered. At 9 o'clock, with the street fully barricaded and the first watch shift manned by Frank and Amika at the entrance, I went inside. Sarah was putting Lily to bed. I stood in the doorway of our daughter's room and watched her sing "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star" in a voice so gentle, it felt like an act of defiance against everything gathering in the dark beyond our walls. Lily's eyes fluttered closed. Her hand curled around a stuffed rabbit Marcus's daughter had given her at a barbecue last July. Sarah looked at me from the rocking chair. In the nightlight's glow, her face was calm and certain. "We're going to keep her safe," she said. It wasn't a question. It was an oath. The first one came at 2 in the morning. Frank radioed from the barricade we'd distributed walkie-talkies from Marcus's supply and said a single word: "Contact." I was downstairs in seconds, the 9mm from Marcus's safe in my hand, moving through the dark house with a focus that surprised me. Not combat training I'd never served, but something older, something cellular. The machinery of protection activating in a father's body with a precision that no amount of civilian life could fully suppress. At the barricade, Frank stood behind the dump trailer with the shotgun shouldered, pointing the barrel toward the through road. Amika was beside him with a heavy flashlight, its beam cutting a white corridor through the darkness. In that corridor, 50 yards out, a figure stood. It was a woman, mid-30s maybe, wearing a hospital gown, barefoot, her left arm hanging at an angle that meant the shoulder was dislocated or worse. She wasn't moving toward us. She was just standing there, swaying slightly, her head cocked at an angle that made my skin crawl. Because it wasn't a human posture, it was the posture of something listening, triangulating, deciding. "She walked up from the south," Frank whispered. "Came out of the tree line about 3 minutes ago." "Is she infected? Look at her feet." Amika lowered the flashlight beam. Her feet were bare and bloody, the skin torn, and she'd walked on them without any sign of pain. No limping, no favoring one side. She had walked on shredded feet the way you or I would walk on carpet. "She doesn't feel it," Amika said. His voice was steady, but I could hear the mathematical part of his mind recalculating every assumption he'd held about the boundaries of biological possibility. The woman's head snapped toward us. Not turned, snapped with a speed that was mechanical, involuntary, like a sensor locking onto a signal. Her mouth opened. The sound she made was not a scream and not a moan. It was a vocalization stripped of language, of intent, of everything that makes a human voice human. It was the sound of a body running software that had been overwritten. She started walking toward the barricade. Not running, walking. That relentless pace the ham radio operator had described. Steady, unvarying, undeterrable. "Do we?" I began. "Not yet," Frank said. "Let the barrier work. That's what it's for." She reached the chain-link fencing and pressed against it. Her fingers curled through the links, and she pulled. Not strategically, but persistently, with a force that made the metal groan. She showed no recognition of us as people. She showed no recognition of anything. Her eyes, caught in the flashlight beam, were open and dilated and utterly vacant windows into a room where every light had been extinguished. "She's going to attract more," Amika said. He was right. Within 10 minutes, 2 more shapes emerged from the tree line. A man in a business suit with his tie still knotted, moving with that same broken gait. And a teenager in athletic clothes who was faster than the others, not running, but walking with longer strides, as though whatever drove him had more fuel to burn. The woman at the fence had begun slamming her body against it. not to break through, I realized, but because the barrier was between her and the sound she'd locked onto, and her only programming was forward. The chain link bowed. One of the zip ties Amika had used to secure it popped free. Frank looked at me. We need to put them down before more come. I had never killed anything larger than a wasp. I had a 2-year-old daughter sleeping 400 feet behind me. I had a wife who'd sung a lullaby 3 hours ago with a voice like a prayer. And I was standing in the dark with a dead man's gun, being asked to make a decision that would cleave my life into before and after. The head, I said, remembering Marcus's note. It's the only reliable stop. Frank nodded, raised the shotgun. The sound it made when he fired was enormous, a concussive blast that rolled down the empty street and echoed off the houses. The woman at the fence dropped. She didn't fall the way a person falls. She collapsed the way a structure collapses when the load-bearing element is removed. The man in the suit didn't flinch at the sound. He kept coming. Amika, who I had not known owned a firearm until that moment, produced a revolver from his waistband and fired twice. The first shot hit the man's chest and did nothing. He staggered, but kept walking. The second hit his head, and he went down. The teenager reached the barricade and began climbing. He was faster, more coordinated, his infection newer or his body younger and more capable of executing the broken commands it was receiving. Frank racked the shotgun and fired again. The teenager fell backward off the chain link and didn't move. Silence returned. It took a long time. The echoes faded, replaced by the sound of insects and the distant, constant drone of something burning. I stood at the barricade with the pistol I hadn't fired, shaking in a way I couldn't control, and stared at 3 bodies on the pavement. 18 hours ago, I'd been at my desk approving shipment reroutes. Frank put a hand on my shoulder. Go check on your family. We'll hold here. I didn't go inside immediately. I sat on my front steps with the gun in my lap and let the shaking run its course. It took about 5 minutes. Not fear, the fear had been present since Marcus handed me the keys. This was something else. This was my nervous system, acknowledging that the world I'd built my life in had just died, as certainly and as irreversibly as the 3 bodies on the other side of our barricade. When I went inside, Sarah was awake, sitting at the top of the stairs in her bathrobe with the .22 rifle across her knees. She'd heard the shots. 3, I said. They came from the south. Frank and Amika handled it. Are you okay? I looked at my hands. They'd stopped shaking, but they didn't feel like my hands anymore. I don't know. Lily slept through it. Good. Daniel. She came down the stairs and stood in front of me, put her hands on my face. We are going to do this. You hear me? We are going to do whatever we have to do. There was something in her voice I'd never heard before. Not just determination, transformation. Sarah, the pragmatist, Sarah, the level-headed project manager of our household, had shed a skin I hadn't realized she was wearing, and emerged as something forged for exactly this moment. I'd married a woman I thought I understood completely. And in that dark hallway, I realized I'd only known the version of her that peacetime allowed. Okay, I said. Okay. By morning, the neighborhood had changed. The gunshots had served as an alarm clock for every household on Oakmont Drive. Even the Yamamotos, who'd politely dismissed my warning the day before, appeared at the barricade at dawn with pale faces and a cooler full of food they wanted to contribute. Hiroshi Yamamoto was a retired engineer. His wife, Keiko, didn't speak much, but moved with a quiet competence that told me she'd been through hardship before and knew how to function inside it. I counted our group. 14 adults, 1 teenager, and Lily. 9 households participating. The Patels were gone. 2 other families had left during the night, the Moraleses and the Dunns, their houses dark and empty, cars missing from driveways. The rest were here because they'd decided, consciously or not, that leaving was more dangerous than staying. We held a meeting in the Hendersons' living room at 8 o'clock. Everyone sat wherever they could find space, couches, chairs, the floor. Kyle Marsh leaned against the wall near the back door, his eyes moving between speakers with an intensity that made him seem older than 17. Lily sat on Sarah's lap, chewing on a cracker, blissfully unaware of the conversation happening above her head. I reported what had happened at the barricade. Frank filled in details. Jess, who'd slept through the encounter but had examined the bodies at first light, provided clinical observations. The tissue degradation around the wound site suggests rapid necrosis. Whatever this pathogen is, it's destroying healthy tissue at an accelerated rate. The bodies are decomposing faster than they should. I estimate these 3 had been infected less than 12 hours. What does that mean for us? Blessing asked. It means if someone gets bitten, we'll know fast. And it means the infected have a shelf life. They're burning through their own bodies. The question is how long they remain mobile before the decomposition catches up. Days? Emeka asked. I don't know. Maybe weeks, maybe less. I'm guessing based on what I can observe. Todd raised his hand, a classroom reflex that made several people smile despite everything. What about the ones who presented symptoms without a bite? You mentioned that at the hospital. Jess hesitated. 2 patients developed symptoms without any observable bite or scratch. That could mean airborne transmission. It could mean they were bitten somewhere I didn't see. I don't have enough data. The room absorbed this. The possibility of airborne transmission sat among us like a 5th season, something that would change everything if it arrived. We operate as though it's fluid-borne only, I said. That's manageable. If it's airborne, nothing we do matters anyway, so planning for it is pointless. It was cold logic, and I saw a few people flinch, but nobody argued. Sometimes pragmatism is the only mercy available. We need a watch schedule, Frank said. 24 hours, 4-hour shifts. 2 people minimum at the barricade at all times. Agreed. And we need rules about the infected. If someone in our group gets bitten, the room went silent. We deal with that if it happens, I said. Not before. The second night was worse, not because of what happened at the barricade. Those 7 more infected came between dusk and dawn, arriving in scattered intervals that prevented anyone from sleeping soundly, but because of what happened inside the perimeter. At 3 in the morning, during the shift change between Todd and Kyle on one side and Jess and Hiroshi on the other, Carol Henderson collapsed in her kitchen. Blessing was there within minutes. She found Carol on the linoleum, conscious but disoriented, her blood pressure dangerously low. It wasn't the infection, there was no bite, no wound, no fever. It was a cardiac event, the kind of thing that might have sent her to a hospital 2 days ago, and now sent her to a dining room table where a pharmacist and a nurse did what they could with a stethoscope, aspirin, and steady hands. Frank sat beside his wife and held her hand with a gentleness that seemed impossible in those thick, calloused fingers. He didn't speak. He just held on. By morning, Carol was stable but weak. She could sit up, drink water, and speak. But the color hadn't returned to her face, and Blessing quietly told me she suspected a minor heart attack. She needs an echocardiogram. She needs blood work. She needs a cardiologist. None of those exist anymore, I said. I know. Blessing and I stood on the Hendersons' back porch, speaking in low voices while the neighborhood went through its morning routines, a phrase that already felt absurd. Though humans are creatures of pattern, and the patterns had established themselves with remarkable speed. Coffee was brewed. Food was distributed. Watch shifts were maintained. Kyle and Amika made a circuit of the perimeter, checking the barricade for weakness. Jess cleaned and dressed a cut on Hiroshi's hand that he'd gotten tightening a bolt the night before. She could die, Blessing said. Without proper treatment, another event could kill her. What do you need that you don't have? An operating room, an entire medical system. She sighed. Realistically, nitroglycerin, beta blockers. I didn't have time to take cardiac medications from the pharmacy. I took broad-spectrum supplies. Is there a pharmacy nearby that might still have stock? The Walgreens on Route 9, maybe 3 miles. Too far. There's the veterinary clinic on Birch Street, about a mile. They carry similar cardiac medications for large animals. The dosages are different, but the compounds are the same. I looked at her. You're suggesting we use animal medicine. I'm suggesting we use medicine. The molecular structure doesn't know what species swallowed it. This was the first supply run. The first time someone would have to leave the perimeter, cross open ground, enter an unsecured building, and come back. I knew it was necessary. I also knew it was the kind of mission that, in every survival story I'd ever consumed as entertainment, was the moment things went irreversibly wrong. I asked for a volunteer, and 3 people responded. Jess, because she could identify the medications. Kyle, because he was young and fast, and had already proven himself capable under pressure. And me, because Carol was in this situation, partly because I'd asked the neighborhood to stay. And the weight of that responsibility sat on my shoulders like a physical load. Sarah found me in the garage loading supplies into a backpack. She didn't try to stop me. She handed me Marcus's handgun, freshly loaded, and a bottle of water. Come back, she said. I will. That's not a request. I kissed her. I kissed Lily, who grabbed my nose and said, "Dada go," with the casual certainty of a child who had no concept of what danger meant. I filed that moment in the place where I keep the things that matter most, not in my memory, but in whatever part of me is deeper than memory. We left through a gap in the barricade that Frank opened and closed behind us. Jess led, shotgun up. I followed. Kyle brought up the rear with a baseball bat that he gripped with the practiced ease of a kid who'd played varsity. The morning air was cool and smelled of ash. We moved down the through road toward Birch Street, staying close to the tree line, stopping every 100 yards to listen. The world outside our perimeter was silent in a way that suburban spaces are never silent. No lawnmowers, no cars, no dogs barking. The absence of sound was its own kind of noise, a high, persistent frequency that pressed against my eardrums and whispered that everything familiar had been subtracted from the equation. We reached the veterinary clinic in 19 minutes. It was a single-story building on a commercial strip between a dry cleaner and a sandwich shop, both of which had their doors standing open. Inside the sandwich shop, I could see chairs overturned and a display case shattered, deli meats spilling onto the floor in various stages of rot. The smell reached us from 20 feet away. Not death, not yet, but the sour prelude to it. The vet clinic's front door was locked. Kyle tried the handle, then looked at me. I used the pry bar from my backpack, and the frame splintered on the second try. The door swung open into a reception area that was undisturbed. Magazines fanned on a coffee table. A bowl of dog treats sat on the counter. The normalcy of it was almost painful. Jess moved through the reception area into the back, where the treatment rooms and pharmacy storage were located. She knew what she was looking for and moved with clinical purpose, pulling open cabinets and scanning labels. Kyle and I stood guard him at the front door, me at the hallway junction where the treatment rooms branched off from the main corridor. It was quiet, almost peaceful. The fluorescent lights were off, but natural light came through high windows, giving the space a diffused, gray quality. I could hear Jess opening and closing drawers. Kyle shifted his weight at the front door. A clock on the wall ticked steadily, its second hand sweeping past numbers that no longer organized anyone's day. Then I heard the sound. It came from the kennels, a door at the end of the corridor marked boarding. A wet, rhythmic thumping, like something hitting a wall at measured intervals. Thump, pause, thump, pause, thump. "Jess," I whispered, "hurry." She appeared in the hallway with a plastic bag full of medication bottles. "Got it. Atenolol, nitroglycerin sublingual, aspirin, and furosemide. All animal grade, but pharmacologically identical." The thumping stopped. The silence that replaced it was worse. I pointed toward the boarding door. She listened. Her face changed. Not fear recognition. She'd heard the sounds of the infected before. She knew what was behind that door. "Move," she said. We went. Fast but controlled, through the reception area and out the front door into the daylight. Kyle was already outside, scanning the street. We moved north, back toward the through road, retracing our path. We were 400 yards from the barricade when Kyle stopped. "Look," he said. On the road ahead, between us and home, a group of infected stood in a loose cluster. 7 of them. They weren't moving, they were standing in the roadway like people waiting for a bus. Heads tilted at various angles, bodies swaying. They hadn't detected us yet. The breeze was at our backs, which meant our scent, if that was a factor, was blowing toward them. Jess pulled us into the tree line. We crouched behind a fallen oak, 30 yards from the road. Through the branches, I counted them again. 7. 3 men, 2 women, a person whose gender I couldn't determine, and my stomach clenched a child. Maybe 8 years old, wearing a school uniform, standing among them with the same vacant stare, the same broken posture, the same absence of everything that should animate a child's face. "We can't shoot our way through 7, Jess whispered, not without attracting every infected within earshot. "We go through the woods," Kyle said. "Circle around. Come in from the east side of the neighborhood." "Is there access from the east?" "The retention pond. There's a gap in the fence behind the Morales' house." I looked at Kyle, 17 years old, and he knew the terrain better than any of us because he'd spent his adolescence exploring it in the way teenagers do on bikes, on foot, charting the geography of boredom. Now that knowledge was tactical. "Lead the way," I said. We moved through the woods in single file. The ground was soft with decomposing leaves, our footsteps muffled. Kyle navigated with confidence, leading us on a wide arc that took us east, then north, skirting the cluster of infected by at least 200 yards. It added 20 minutes to our return, but those 20 minutes kept us alive. We emerged at the retention pond behind the Morales' empty house. The gap in the fence was exactly where Kyle had said it would be. We squeezed through, crossed 2 backyards, and reached the Hendersons' back door. Frank met us there, shotgun ready, relief written across his weathered face in lines that hadn't been there 2 days ago. Blessing took the medication bag from Jess and was at Carol's side within seconds. I watched her administer the first dose of atenolol with the measured precision of someone performing a sacrament, and I thought about the series of improbable events that had placed a Nigerian-born pharmacist in a suburban American neighborhood at the exact moment her knowledge could save a retired school nurse's life. Coincidence, Marcus might have said, is God maintaining plausible deniability. Carol improved over the next 24 hours. Not dramatically, she was still pale, still weak, still requiring rest, but the medication was working. Her blood pressure was stabilizing, and the tight fear in Frank's eyes loosened by a single, precious degree. He thanked me at the barricade that evening, and the way he said it, just my name, followed by a nod, carried more weight than any formal expression of gratitude could have. But the crisis with Carol had exposed something I'd been avoiding. We weren't sustainable. Our supplies, generous as Marcus had been, were finite. The food would last perhaps 2 more weeks with careful rationing. The water was more precarious. We'd filled every bathtub and container we could find. But 14 adults and 2 children consumed a startling amount. The generators provided power for the medical station and for refrigeration. But the fuel was diminishing visibly, each day's operation eating into our reserves with merciless arithmetic. And then there was the psychological cost. By the 4th day, the compound stress was manifesting in ways that surprised me. Todd Marsh had stopped sleeping entirely. He sat in his kitchen at all hours, staring at his phone, even though cellular service had died the day before, scrolling through a contact list of people he could no longer reach. Keiko Yamamoto had developed a tremor in her hands that worsened each time gunfire echoed from the barricade. Kyle was holding up remarkably well, but I noticed he'd started talking to himself during watch shifts, quiet, continuous muttering that I recognized as a coping mechanism and worried about nonetheless. The infected came nightly now. Never in overwhelming numbers, the most we'd faced at once was 12. During a surge on the 3rd night that had required every armed adult at the barricade for 40 minutes of controlled, deliberate shooting. But their persistence wore on us the way water wears on stone. Not through force, but through constancy. Every night, the shapes emerged from the tree line. Every night, the guns spoke. Every morning, we dragged the bodies to a growing pile at the edge of the through road, and every morning, the pile was larger. On the 4th evening, a new problem arrived. Not infected human. A van appeared on the through road from the north, moving fast, headlights blazing in the dusk. It stopped 50 yards from our barricade, and 3 people got out. 2 men and a woman, all armed, all wearing civilian clothes that were dirty and torn. The woman raised her hands. "We're not sick," she shouted. "We need help." I was at the barricade with Amika. We kept our weapons raised. Behind us, Frank emerged from the Hendersons' house and took up position with a shotgun. "Where did you come from?" I called back. "Ridgeview. The development off Highway 12. It's gone. They overran it last night." "How many are you?" "Just us 3. There were more. We lost them." Amika looked at me. The question in his eyes was the question that would define us. Do we let them in? "Show us your arms," Jess called from behind me. She'd appeared with her medical bag, already thinking ahead. "Both arms, roll up your sleeves." The 3 strangers complied. Even at 50 yards, in the fading light, we could see clean skin. No bites, no wounds. "Come forward slowly," I said. "Weapons on the ground." They approached. The woman's name was Dana, early 40s, former EMT. The men were brothers Rick and Leo Castillo, construction workers, both in their late 20s. They were exhausted, dehydrated, and terrified. But they were coherent, and their eyes were clear. Jess examined them in the Hendersons' dining room. No bites, no scratches, no signs of infection. Blessing gave them water and reheated rice. Dana sat at the table with her head in her hands and said quietly, "There were 60 people in our development. 60. And then there were 3. I sat across from her and waited. She looked up. They came through the fences like they weren't there. Hundreds of them. We heard them before we saw them, this sound, this moaning that wasn't moaning. It was just noise, just the sound of mouths that couldn't stop opening. We fought. God, we fought. But there were too many, and the ones who got bitten." She stopped, breathed. The ones who got bitten became the ones biting. The math turns against you so fast. The math turns against you. I filed that phrase alongside everything Marcus had taught me from 30 miles away and 3 days gone. On the 5th morning, I climbed onto the roof of my house and looked out over Oakmont Drive and the surrounding landscape. What I saw reorganized my understanding of our situation with brutal clarity. To the south, the smoke I'd seen on the first day had become a permanent feature of the sky, a brown-gray haze that obscured the horizon and smelled of burning plastic and something organic beneath it. To the east, where the veterinary clinic sat on its commercial strip, I could see movement on the roads. Not individual infected, but masses of them, flowing along the highway like dark water following the path of least resistance. To the west, the subdivision adjacent to ours, Lakewood Pines, a development 3 times our size, was burning. Not all of it, but enough. Columns of smoke rose from at least 6 houses, and through the haze I could see shapes moving between the structures with that terrible, purposeless gait. To the north, the road was clear, for now. I came down from the roof and called a meeting. Everyone gathered in the Hendersons' living room, our 17-person community, plus Dana and the Castillo brothers, who'd been absorbed into our group with the implicit understanding that every pair of hands and every set of eyes improved our odds. "We can't stay," I said. The words landed like a detonation. I watched faces change, relief on some, resistance on others, raw fear on a few. The infected are concentrating to our south and east. Lakewood Pines is falling. When it does, those infected will spread into the surrounding area, and some of them will come here. We don't have the ammunition or the people to hold against a surge of the size Dana described. "Where do we go?" Todd asked. His voice was thin and strained, a wire being tightened past its tolerance. "North," Frank said. He'd seen it too, from the barricade. The terrain changes about 8 miles north. Hills, forest, fewer developments. Fewer people meant fewer infected. 8 miles on foot with a 2-year-old, Sarah said, not arguing, calculating. "We have the Van Dana's group brought," I said. "We have Frank's truck. We have the Marsh's SUV. That's enough to move everyone and critical supplies. We drive north until the roads are clear, then find a defensible position." "When?" Amika asked. "Tomorrow. First light. We spend today packing, planning the route, and preparing the vehicles." The debate that followed was the most intense conversation our group had experienced. Hiroshi argued for staying, citing the strength of our fortifications and the danger of open travel. Dana argued fiercely for leaving, her voice breaking as she described the speed with which Ridgeview's defenses had been overwhelmed. Todd sat in silence, his face gray, until Kyle put a hand on his father's shoulder and said, "Dad, we need to go." It was Kyle who swung the room. Not because of what he said, but because of who he was, 17, and calm, and already carrying himself like a man who'd accepted the weight of the world without asking for permission to set it down. We voted, 12 in favor of leaving, 5 against. The 5 included Hiroshi and Keiko, who ultimately agreed to come when Amika pointed out that staying as a group of two was functionally a death sentence. The preparation consumed the rest of the day. We packed food, water, medical supplies, weapons, and fuel into the 3 vehicles with the spatial efficiency of people who understood that everything left behind was gone forever. I made 3 last trips into Marcus's house. On the final one, I stood in his kitchen where the yellow note had been taped and said out loud to no one, "Thank you." That evening, our last on Oakmont Drive, the infected came earlier than usual. A group of 9 emerged from the southern tree line at sunset, drawn perhaps by the noise of our preparations. Frank and the Castillo brothers handled them at the barricade with practiced coordination. The sounds of the shots rolled across the empty neighborhood and faded into the haze. I sat with Lily on the floor of her bedroom while Sarah packed the last of our belongings. I'd taken her crib apart and loaded it into the truck. She'd sleep in the car seat tomorrow, surrounded by supplies and weapons and the remnants of a life that had been ordinary 6 days ago. She held her rabbit and looked up at me with eyes that trusted completely, that had never known a reason not to. "Dada go?" she said. "Yeah, baby. Dada go. We all go." "Mama go?" "Mama too." She considered this. Then she held up the rabbit. "Bunny go?" "Bunny definitely goes." She smiled. And in that smile, I found the answer to a question I hadn't known I was asking. Why keep going? Why fight? Why drag yourself through the horror and the loss and the unrecognizable landscape of a world that has come apart? Because a 2-year-old holds up a stuffed rabbit and smiles. And in that gesture is everything worth preserving innocence and trust and the stubborn, irrational beauty of a child who doesn't know the dark is coming. We left at dawn. The convoy was 3 vehicles. Frank's truck in the lead with Frank driving and Carol beside him, still weak but insistent on being upright. The Marsh's SUV in the middle, driven by Todd with Kyle, Jess, and the Castillo brothers, and Dana's van bringing up the rear, driven by Amika with Blessing, Hiroshi, Keiko, Sarah, Lily, and me. We'd mapped a route north along secondary roads, avoiding the highway, which aerial view posts from the last working social media accounts had shown was a graveyard of abandoned vehicles. The first 2 miles were clear. We moved at 30 miles an hour, fast enough to outpace the infected, slow enough to navigate obstacles. The neighborhood streets were empty, houses standing silent with their doors closed or open, each one a Schrodinger's box that might contain survivors or infected or nothing at all. We didn't stop. We didn't look. At mile 3, we hit the first blockage. A jackknifed delivery truck lay across the road at an intersection. Its cargo of bottled water spilled across the asphalt in a glittering carpet of plastic. Frank pulled his truck to a stop. Kyle jumped out with a hand axe and began clearing a path through the debris. The rest of us sat in our vehicles, engines running, watching the tree line. That's when I saw them. Not in front of us, behind us. Coming up the road we'd just traveled, a mass of infected moving north with the same mindless persistence that defined their every action. Dozens of them, maybe 100, maybe more. They moved like a tide, filling the road from curb to curb, their collective sound reaching us as a low, continuous moan that vibrated in my chest cavity. "Kyle!" I shouted from the van's window. "Now, move now." He looked up, saw what I was seeing, and threw the last case of water off the road with a strength born of pure adrenaline. Frank gunned the truck through the gap. Todd followed. Amika brought the van through with inches to spare on either side, the mirrors scraping the delivery truck's undercarriage. We drove, faster now. The secondary road climbed into hilly terrain, leaving the suburban flatland behind. The infected fell away, they couldn't match our speed, and the distance opened like a wound, closing in reverse. The pressure releasing, the danger receding. But I knew it wasn't gone. It was never gone. It was simply not here yet. At mile 7, Frank's truck pulled over at a scenic overlook, a gravel turnout on a ridge that offered a panoramic view of the valley we'd left behind. We all got out. We all looked. The valley was burning, not in a single conflagration, but in dozens of individual fires, each marking a neighborhood or a commercial district that had fallen. The haze was thick, and through it, the landscape of my former life, the logistics office, the hardware store, the elementary school Lily would have attended in 3 years, was disappearing beneath a shroud of smoke and silence. Nobody spoke for a long time. "There's a state forest about 4 miles ahead," Frank said, consulting a paper map spread across the hood of his truck. "Campground, cabins, well water, high ground with limited access roads." "It's a start," Jess said. I looked at our group. 20 people standing on a ridge, watching the world burn. Dana leaned against the van, her face blank, processing another loss on top of losses she was still metabolizing. Rick Castillo had his arm around his brother Leo, who was crying quietly and without shame. Todd had his hand on Kyle's shoulder. Hiroshi and Keiko stood together, her tremoring hand in his steady one. Frank held Carol against his side. Blessing stood with her arms crossed, her pharmacist's mind already cataloging what she'd need to establish medical support wherever we landed. Emeka found me at the edge of the overlook. He stood beside me and looked out at the smoke. "In Lagos, when I was a boy," he said, "there was a flood. Our neighborhood was underwater in an hour. My father put my sister and me on the roof and went back for our mother. The water took our house, took our school, took everything." He paused. "But it didn't take us, because my father decided it wouldn't." He looked at me. "You are that father now, for all of us." I didn't feel like a father for all of them. I felt like a man who'd been handed keys by a neighbor and stumbled forward because stopping meant dying. But I understood what Emeka was offering, not flattery, but architecture, a framework, a reason to keep deciding, keep moving, keep building, even when what you're building might be swept away tomorrow. "Let's go," I said. We got back in the vehicles. Frank's truck led us north along the ridge road, away from the valley, into the hills. The road narrowed. The trees thickened. The smoke thinned. For the first time in 5 days, the sky above us was blue. Not the limitless blue of a world at peace, but the cautious, uncertain blue of a world that still existed, that still offered horizon lines, and the faint, defiant suggestion of distance. Lily fell asleep in her car seat, clutching her rabbit. Sarah reached across the center console and took my hand. We drove north. 7 weeks now. The campground has become something that almost resembles a settlement. Frank reinforced the cabins with materials salvaged from a shuttered ranger station 2 miles east. Blessing runs a clinic from the largest cabin, her animal-grade medications supplemented by supplies Jess and Dana recovered from an abandoned urgent care facility during a run last week. Emeka built a communication network from repurposed radios, and 3 nights ago, we made contact with another group 40 miles northeast, 31 people, organized, holding. We are not safe. Safety, as I understood it before Marcus handed me those keys, no longer exists as a concept. What exists is vigilance and community, and the daily decision to maintain both. Carol is walking again. Todd smiles sometimes. Kyle has become the person our scouts follow without question. A young man whose competence is so natural it seems hereditary. Lily said a new word yesterday. She pointed at the forest, at the trees and the birds, and the impossible persistence of the living world. And she said, home. I looked at Sarah. She looked at me. We didn't correct her. Marcus, wherever you are, we understood. It took 48 hours, just like you knew it would. Thank you for the keys. Thank you for the time. We're still here. We're still deciding. And the math hasn't turned against us yet.